Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode. My name is Dana Mantilia, and my guest today is Dan DeBlasio. Dan, thank you for coming along and joining us. Why don't we listen and you tell us a little bit about you, what you do, all that kind of good stuff, so we know a little bit about Dan.
All right. Well, I'm Dan DeBlasio, as you've said, and I've been in physical security and cybersecurity for over 23 years. And when I was at Gem Plus Gemalto, I was tasked with early demoing public key infrastructure and then eventually selling it because I wanted that opportunity to move into sales. So I had the technical background as well as the sales background on public key infrastructure and the components of it and why it's so important and why it's so secure.
That's really good because a lot of salespeople don't have that technical knowledge. So having both, that must have been very helpful.
Yes, it was funny. It was a gentleman I visited said to me, "You want to go into sales?" And I said, "Yes." And this was like 1997. And he said, "Dan, whatever you do, do not lose your technical background."
Yeah.
Some of the best advice he ever gave. I ever got, really.
Yeah, that's great. That's
yeah.
great. This is a good topic for us to talk about too, because I don't think that I've had anybody on that's talked about this. I mean, we've touched base on two-factor authentication, but nothing on public key infrastructure. So I'm excited to talk about it.
Great. Well, in the United States, the first real major deployment of public key infrastructure on smart cards was the common access card with the DoD. And what was amazing to me is you have to understand that it's actually, when you look at your credit card today, they call that a chip, right? That you see on the plastic. It's actually a module. So there's a plate on top, which is the contact plate. And then below that is an actual computer chip. And to be able to see these things manufactured, you have to look through a microscope because they actually solder onto the chip wires, and then the wires are soldered onto the contact plate, and then it's encapsulated in epoxy so that it can be embedded in the card. So with the Department of Defense, their return on investment happened very fast. I forget what they call a Marine platoon or brigade that they would put on a ship. You know, they were going to take them over to Afghanistan or wherever. It used to take them a week. Once they deployed the common access card, they could take that same platoon or brigade and get them on the ship in 8 hours.
Wow.
Yeah, because, you know, think about your computer and it has a CPU, right? Well, the smart card and public key infrastructure has a CPU to it, if you will, so it can store data, right? So it has rank, file, you know, everything about you as a military participant. And that all goes into the computer once you enter your PIN to release the data, right? And that's why it's two-factor. It's something you have, in this case, a card, a smart card, and something you know, which is your PIN. Very similar to a debit card that you use at the bank or the grocery store, right? Mm-hmm. And that's basically two-factor authentication. Something you have, something you know. And if it went to three-factor authentication, something you have, something you know, and something you are. So biometric, like a fingerprint or facial recognition, that's that third component to authentication, right? Mm-hmm. In certain key areas. So for an example, when I worked for BQT Solutions, one of our clients was Wells Fargo Bank, and they used our biometric three-factor authentication reader in all their data centers globally. So you had to have a card, a PIN, and then you had to put your fingerprint on the reader, and all those had to jive for you to begin access to that data center.
Okay. Well, this is going to be a good little talk here. So our first question for this is going to be, so why use PKI for two-factor authentication?
Well, as of today, it's never been hacked. And you have to understand that there's two major components in the background to public key infrastructure. There's a certificate server, right, called a CMS, certificate management server, that gives you the certificate, the digital certificate that goes on the smart card. And then there's a hardware security module that issues you your public and private key. So there's a public and private key and a digital certificate on the smart card for public key infrastructure. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay. So, you know, for an example, when I was at HID Global, we had a deal with Dell where every latitude that left the factory had a 13.56 megahertz reader right next to the touchpad. And so what you could do, we developed a product where you could touch it with your badge that normally gets you in the building. And then instead of entering a password, you could enter a PIN, right, to get into Windows and get on the network. Not quite as secure as public key infrastructure, where you're using that digital certificate where it's validated against the certificate authority that it hasn't been revoked. Okay. So an example of what the government went ahead and did a little further was they came up with what they call the PKI card. And that's my PKI card, if you can see that. Let's see. And so it has the module, the chip, it's public key infrastructure. I had to have a background check by the FBI to be issued a PKI card. And so it's basically the same thing as a common access card. It just doesn't carry as much personal data about you as the common access card. So again, it can validate senators, Congress people, people in the DOJ, et cetera, onto the network or to access files or whatever. They actually have a reader where they insert the card that's connected to the computer. And as an example, if you remember, I think it was Snowden who secrets and published those, and those were NSA secrets. So the NSA came to us and they wanted to redo everybody's ID and redo their PKI infrastructure, and they got readers from us, etc., so that they could lock down what Snowden had released. I mean, that was a very expensive theft, because that was millions of dollars for the NSA to redo that. But it kept their, I'll call it their secrets safe. Yeah.
Are you having a hard time finding new customers? A lot of folks just like you in the IT and cybersecurity space are in the same situation. And they have embraced a new opportunity to get new clients. They're doing this by growing their online presence and maximizing the power of LinkedIn. How, you ask? I have a tried and tested method called my Cyber Social Program. I myself have been on LinkedIn and now have over 3.5 million LinkedIn views, and over on YouTube, I have over 750,000 video views. So I can show you exactly how I have done that so that you can promote your organization and become the authority in your industry. And the best part is, I've done all of this organically without one paid ad. You don't need to waste your money over on Google with pay-per-click ads. Now's the time to establish yourself. Look around, the competition isn't doing it. This is your time to shine online before they do. So if you're ready to start your online journey and future-proof your business, please, down below, click the link and schedule a time for us to have a 45-minute call where I can review the exact methodology of the Cyber Social Program. You can also click below to see some of my masterclasses, which will give you quick little snippets of a couple of things you can do right away on LinkedIn that will help with your profile. I hope to see you and hear from you soon.
Wow. That's impressive. I never knew that story. I bet a lot of people watching this didn't know that story.
There was a lot of unfortunate side effects with the federal government. because of him. And I just saw in the news in the last month that Putin has given him Russian citizenship.
Yeah, I saw that too. Lovely.
Yeah.
All right. So what can you use two-factor authentication for?
Well, you can use it to enter a building. I mean, sometimes you'll see a building that instead of just a black reader with a light on top, it'll actually have a keypad. So you present your card and you enter your PIN to get the door unlocked. And the reader and the card actually communicate back and forth. So the reader can validate the PIN because the PIN information is actually on the card, right? So that's one thing you can use it for. You can raise the level, if you will, of security of getting into your building or getting into an area in the building. You can use it, you know, I worked with a company called MySmart, and they had a tablet that had a reader on the top where you could use a smart card for purchases or credit card for purchases online, but you were doing it with the chip, not the mag stripe, or not entering your card numbers into a, you know, web page, right? So a lot more secure. And, you know, as I said, identity, as they use it, the common access card with the government. I also did an opportunity with Pfizer where Pfizer, Merck, and the other pharmaceutical companies lobbied the FDA. Instead of shipping them paper on their new drugs and the drug testing, they were able to have their doctors sign their chemical notebooks with a smart card certifying that it was Dr. Johnson or whoever it might be, and then they could submit CDs or DVDs of all their data rather than paper. So it really saved a lot, you know, on the paper submittals, because when I worked with Pfizer, they told me they were FedEx's third largest customer. And I'll never forget when they told me that. I said, wait a minute, how much paper do you submit on a drug test? And they said, Dan, it could be 1 to 2 semi-trailers, because we have a network in the United States of over 100,000 doctors that participate in different drug trials. And, you know, all the pharmaceutical companies utilize these 100,000 doctors. So I looked at the gentleman at Pfizer and I said, wait a minute, are you telling me the FDA actually reads all that paper? I won't tell you what he told me.
All right, we'll leave that part out.
I don't want to scare anybody, you know, but it was fascinating.
Yeah, I bet. That's amazing. Two tractor trailers. Okay. All right. So at least now they're saving a lot of trees too, in addition to not having to move all that paper. All right. So what is a CMS and why is it important?
So that's a certificate management solution, okay, or server, sorry, certificate management server. And that's where the digital certificate that resides on your public key infrastructure smart card chip, that's who issues it and validates that it's still valid, okay? And that would be, you know, if you were to see the background of, you know, you think you just insert your card and enter your PIN, but what happens is it releases such certificate, like when you use your debit card at the bank or at a supermarket or wherever, it actually releases a certificate. It gets validated by the CMS and sends back a token that says, you know, this is good, right? The card is legitimate. And I like that very much because I understand the technology. And the difference between Europe and the United States, Europe did the same two-factor authentication with their credit cards. So when you use your credit card, you have a PIN associated with it in Europe. In the United States, we still sign, right? Which doesn't validate, there's nothing you know that gets validated with your credit card. And I did research on that because when smart cards came out, I believe it was 2015 in the US, I found out that the banks and the issuers decided it was too expensive with the infrastructure to add that PIN to the credit card. And I'm thinking to myself, really? You know, do you realize the security exposure you have? But they've always lived with that. In fact, it was Europe that forced the United States to go to chip-based credit and debit cards because the US had the largest fraudulent credit card debt, if you will, globally. So whenever we'd go to Europe or somebody go to Europe and they would use a fraudulent credit card, they couldn't validate it at the point of sale system, right? Where with a CMS and your credit card or your debit card today, it gets validated and the token comes back and, you know, basically says, yes, proceed. It's okay.
Do you think that that's going to happen here, that we're going to have PINs with our credit cards?
I hope so, but I haven't heard any movement on that because they would have to put in a pretty significant infrastructure on the back end for that to happen. And then people would, you know, I haven't really thought too much of this through, but if you had a bank issued credit card, you could go to the bank and establish your PIN, right? But with American Express, you'd have to find an American Express office somewhere to be able to do that. So, you know, I remember being in Greece and they had a bank strike and nobody would take my traveler's checks and they were issued by American Express. So I found the American Express office in Athens and I went in and she said, well, Mr. DeBlasio, what can I do for you? Well, I'd like to cash a couple traveler's checks. Well, how much would you like to cash? I go, there's no limit. She goes, no, this is American Express. There's no limit. And that locked me into American Express. You know, I mean, I have a platinum card with them now because I've been with them for so long, but their customer service is just unrivaled.
Yeah.
Hopefully I've answered your certificate management server.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And our next question is going to be, what type of keys does PKI utilize?
Okay. Well, they use symmetric keys, and there's two, a public key and a private key. So you can actually encrypt an email that you're sending to somebody, but you need to share your public key with them so they can open it and read it. So, you know, it gives you so many variables of security, if you will, but it uses symmetric keys and it's a public and a private key that's actually on the smart card.
Okay. Well, this is very, very helpful. So is there anything else you want to throw out there? I know you just shared a lot of really interesting stuff with us.
Well, I enjoy the technology. I always have. In fact, there was a networking group in Orange County, California called Ethos, and they asked me to speak before the new credit cards came out so that everybody in attendance, they used to have 50 or 60 people show up on a Saturday morning. And I gave a presentation on, you know, what the credit cards were, the back-end infrastructure, why it was important, and, you know, how secure the debit card was. But I also told them that, you know, with your credit card, even though it's got a chip on it, you're not entering a PIN. So it's not as secure as your debit card. And that still bugs me, you know, because I don't understand the back-end system that still validates that the card is still okay, right? But I have to admit, I've had one of my credit cards, for lack of a better term, stolen. You know, I mean, the credit card number, because I bought something on the web. And I was able to call the bank. I saw the charge. I knew it was false. Gave them enough information. They reissued my card. So, you know, that's their way of still keeping things secure, if you will. I mean, it's always important that you check your credit card statements on at least a weekly basis, if not daily. And if you see something strange on there, you need to call the bank and tell them that it was fraudulent. You didn't make that charge.
Mm-hmm.
And the way they protect you is they issue you a new card.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Sometimes you get a text message that says, "Did you make this transaction?" And if you say no, then your credit card is done, and then they have to send you a new one. So,
yes, and that's one thing about the banks that I like. You get that text message or you get an email. Did you make this charge? Or they don't even allow it to happen.
Right.
They think it's fraudulent until you say, no, I'm trying to make that purchase, and then they'll authorize it and let it go through.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So, good point.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, this was very, very helpful. Thank you so much for your time and all of your expertise. Appreciate you coming on and sharing all this with everybody.
Great. I enjoyed it. It was fun.
Good, good, good. Well, thank you everybody for watching, and we'll see you on the next episode. Until then, take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.